My name is Maggie Lowe. I just stepped into retirement after decades of work, and to most people, my days probably looked like a dream. Leisurely brunches, afternoon strolls, the occasional glass of wine with friends, and the freedom to do whatever I pleased. But every time I came home to an empty house and sank into the silence of my living room, all I could feel was a weight of loneliness settling in like dust. When I was young, I'd had a love I thought would last forever, the kind that sweeps you off your feet and promises to stay. But the man who swore he'd love me for life walked out for someone else. After that, I stopped believing in romance. I poured everything into my work, filling the decades with schedules and promotions, thinking that maybe if I stayed busy enough, I wouldn't feel the emptiness. Now, suddenly, I was in the final act of my life. I'd made peace with the idea of growing old alone, that is, until one rainy afternoon at the Community Senior Center, I met Raymond. It was coming down hard that day, and I'd forgotten my umbrella. I was standing under the awning, frowning at the downpour, when a warm voice spoke behind me. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently. "How about we share?" I turned around and saw a man, silver-haired but full of life, holding out a large black umbrella. His smile was kind, not too eager, just genuine. I was going to say no, but the rain was relentless. I gave a small nod instead. "I'm Raymond Walker," he said as we walked side by side. 68 years old, live right in that building across the street. Used to be a mechanical engineer before I retired. I thought it was just a chance encounter, but then I ran into him again at the park. This time, Raymond had a calm way about him, always speaking with a light-hearted tone and a glint of mischief in his eye. He'd stop by just to talk. No agenda, no expectations. With him, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: ease. Having a friend like him didn't sound so bad. A few months later, he invited me over for dinner. As I stepped into his cozy, slightly cluttered apartment, I couldn't help but ask, "So, where's your family?" He handed me a cup of tea, motioning for me to sit. "My wife passed away a long time ago," he said quietly. "It's just been me, really. I've learned to manage." There was a flicker of sadness in his eyes. I knew that look. I'd seen it in the mirror. After dinner, he surprised me. He looked right at me, serious this time. "Maggie," he said, "what would you think about us living together? Not as husband and wife, if you don't want that. As companions. Someone to wake up to, someone to share the quiet with." I froze. My heart kicked in my chest like it had forgotten how to beat properly. I'd only ever thought of Raymond as a friend. I didn't expect him to say something like that, certainly not tonight, not over pot roast and sweet tea. He must have seen the panic on my face because he laughed nervously and waved a hand. Don't mind me, I was just joking." That was a joke. The meal ended on an awkward note, both of us fumbling for small talk to fill the silence. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying his words. Two lonely people sharing whatever time we had left. Was that really such a wild idea? The more I thought about it, the more it started to feel right. So I picked up my phone, hesitated just a second, then typed out the message, "I think I'd like that." A week later, I moved into Raymond's home. Just like he said, we were companions, nothing more, nothing less. We cooked our meals together, ran errands side by side, and took long, quiet walks in the park. Life settled into a gentle rhythm. Raymond had a heart condition and needed to take daily medication. I made sure he never missed a dose and watched his diet like a hawk. He'd often smile at me and say, "With you around, I feel like I could live a whole extra lifetime." To be honest, Raymond treated me better than anyone ever had. Every time he went out, he'd come back with little surprises, sometimes a bouquet of flowers, sometimes just my favorite snack from the store. When I got sick, he never left my side. When I was down, he'd do anything, absolutely anything to make me laugh. At some point, Raymond stopped feeling like a friend and started feeling like home. And I started to believe maybe, just maybe, we really could grow old together. But there was one shadow that lingered: his son, Richard. No matter how kind I was, he never warmed up to me, always kept his distance, always watched me like I had something to hide. Once I overheard him saying to Raymond, "Dad, you're not a kid anymore. Can't you see what she's after? Why else would someone like her be with you if it wasn't for the money?" I pretended I didn't hear it. Some walls inside people's hearts are too tall to climb. You can't knock them down, you can only choose not to hit them at all. So I focused on being present, on being kind, on being myself. But happiness, as I learned, can be fragile. In the third winter of our life together, Raymond's heart gave out. It happened so fast, too fast. The ambulance hadn't even arrived when he stopped breathing in my arms. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. At the funeral, Richard wept openly, shoulders shaking. I stood to the side, hollowed out, numb. I couldn't even cry. Raymond was gone, and with him, the only warmth I had left in this chapter of life. The day after the funeral, I was sorting through Raymond's belongings when Richard showed up at the house. "Maggie," he said, standing in the doorway like he owned the place. "We need to talk." I set the photo album down and looked up. "About what?" He didn't waste time. "This house belonged to my father, and now I'm taking it back." I stared at him, stunned. "Richard, I know your father and I weren't legally married, but for the past 3 years—" "3 years what?" He cut me off sharply. "You think looking after my dad for a few years gives you the right to his estate?" I did some digging. There's no marriage certificate, no will. Legally speaking, you've got no claim. None. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "I never wanted anything from him," I said, voice breaking. I just, but the tears came too fast, drowning the rest of my words. For 3 years, I'd loved that man with everything I had. I tried to show his family that I wasn't the woman they thought I was. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see my heart. But to them, I was nothing more than a gold digger who overstayed her welcome. "Fine," I said, forcing myself to stand despite the trembling in my knees. "Give me 2 days to pack." And 2 days later, I rolled my suitcase out of what used to be my home. Just before stepping out the door, I turned to look at the framed photo of Raymond on the wall. His warm smile seemed to whisper an apology I'd never hear aloud. I returned to the old house I hadn't lived in for years. Dust coated every surface like a blanket of silence. It took me a full week to clean it up, room by room, until it resembled something livable. I survived on a modest pension, barely. The days blurred together, the nights were longer, the ache in my chest never really left. Without Raymond, sleep became a stranger. I spent more nights staring at the ceiling than dreaming. During the day, I moved through the hours like a ghost. Time passed, as it always does. 2 years went by. Life found a dull rhythm again. I managed, but every time I passed the farmer's market where Raymond and I used to shop together, the memories hit like a wave, unexpected and sharp. Because of my health history, I made sure to get annual checkups. This year, though, something changed. My doctor called after the tests came back. He sounded cautious. "We'd like you to get further testing at the regional hospital." My heart sank. Something was wrong. I made an appointment at the city medical center. The results, terrifying. Early stage lung cancer. Surgery was urgent. "The operation and post-treatment will run around $150,000, the doctor said. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Over the past few years, most of my pension had gone toward living expenses. With Raymond, we shared everything, and I never wanted to rely solely on him. Raymond's medications weren't cheap either. More than once, I chipped in to help. Now, my savings were nearly gone, and $150,000. That might as well have been $1 million. After leaving the hospital, I went straight to the bank to withdraw some money for the upcoming tests. As I stood in line, my mind drifted back to that day 2 years ago when I was forced out of Raymond's house. Richard's voice still echoed in my ears, sharp and cutting. "Next!" The teller's call snapped me out of it. I stepped up and handed over my passbook and ID. "I'd like to withdraw $20,000, please." The teller tapped away at her keyboard for a moment, then glanced up at me with a flicker of surprise before continuing. After another pause, she slid the cash and passbook across the counter. "Ma'am, would you mind verifying your balance?" I took the booklet without thinking, but the moment I saw the number on the last line, my breath caught in my throat. What, what is this? There should have been maybe a few thousand left in the account. But no, $257,000, not $5,000, not $50, but $257,000. A sum so far beyond anything I ever imagined sitting in my own bank account. My throat went dry. Where did this money come from?" I asked, barely getting the words out. "One moment, ma'am," she replied, her tone turning professional. I'll have our financial manager take a look. 5 minutes later, a man in a deep navy suit led me into his office. His name was Mr. Griffin, middle-aged, composed, with the kind of quiet demeanor that makes people trust him. He turned the screen toward me, brought up the account history, and said, "Ms. Lowe, this money comes from a living trust. It was established 3 years ago, and quarterly deposits have been made to this account ever since. The trust holder's name is Raymond." I didn't even hear the last few words. My ears rang. Raymond. He never said a word about setting up a trust. Never talked about marriage, always said he didn't want to give me the wrong idea. But now I was staring at evidence of a trust fund he had created for me quietly, thoroughly, lovingly. Over $250,000 transferred in over time, untouched. My eyes filled with tears. So this was his way of saying what he couldn't put into words. Griffin nodded gently. "Yes, ma'am. The trust names you as the sole beneficiary. It was temporarily frozen a few months before his passing, but resumed as scheduled 30 days after his death." I blinked. "Wait, why was it frozen?" He hesitated, then said, "There's a note in the system, pending review for mental competency claim. It appears someone submitted medical documentation questioning Mr. Walker's cognitive capacity. That paused the distribution temporarily." My heart dropped. I knew instantly who had done it. Richard. It was him. The coldness in his eyes, the accusations, the eviction. He knew. He knew about this trust all along, and he tried everything he could to make sure I'd never see a penny of it. My fingers curled tightly around the passbook. My knuckles went white. By the time I stepped out of the bank that day, the sky had turned gray. The streets were slick with rain, and people rushed by under umbrellas, not one of them noticing the elderly woman standing on the curb with tears brimming in her eyes. I wasn't crying over the money. I cried because Raymond had planned all along. He protected me in the only way he knew how. It wasn't that he didn't see me as family. He just knew his own son would never treat me like one. I walked for blocks, not even realizing my shoes were soaked through, until I finally ducked into a corner cafe. The place was warm and nearly empty. I took a seat by the window where a withered pot of rosemary sat on the sill. I stared at it, feeling a strange kinship with its dry, brittle leaves. I had thought it was all over, but life has a strange way of rising from its own ashes. Just when you believe it's gone dark forever, it unfolds its wings, quiet and stubborn. I wiped my tears and pulled out my phone. "Hi, could you connect me to the local legal aid center?" A calm voice on the other end answered, "This is Maggie speaking. I'm a retired attorney volunteering with the community center. How can I help you?" My voice trembled. "I need help looking into a trust file. It was left to me by my late partner." Maggie Randall was in her 70s. She spoke slowly but with precision, like a dulled axe that still hit clean to the heart of every problem. When we met for the first time, I handed her a trembling folder of documents. She looked at me and simply said, "Let's not rush. We'll go through it one page at a time." We laid everything out on the table, a trust summary from the bank, 2 copied letters, and the original contract clearly dated from 3 years ago, titled Living Trust. "Raymond," she murmured, scanning the document. "Old mechanical engineer, I remember him. He came to me once, asking about beneficiary rights for unmarried partners." I looked up in surprise. "He came to you?" She nodded and flipped open a leather-bound notebook. Clear as day, he asked me if it was legally safe to set up a trust for a woman who wasn't his wife. I told him so long as he was of sound mind and everything was signed and witnessed properly, there's no legal issue. "Did you help him set it up?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "I just gave him the basics. He ended up working with a different firm. I remember the name. Young guy named Barrett. Specializes in estate planning." She tapped the bottom corner of the document. "See here? That's Barrett Law's stamp. But the final page, that's strange." I leaned in. Where Raymond's signature should have been, there was only a smudge, barely legible ink. Next to it, stamped in red, were the words, "Revoked under review." My stomach dropped. What, what does that mean?" Maggie's voice stayed calm, but her expression sharpened. "It usually means someone contested the signature. Either the person who created the trust tried to revoke or revise it, or someone else filed a claim in court arguing he was mentally unfit when he signed it." My hands went cold. "You mean it could have been Richard?" I barely got the words out. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she pulled out a yellow notepad. I'm going to file a request with Barrett's office. We'll ask for the original documentation and any available signing footage. If someone moved to revoke it, there has to be a legal paper trail. Can we find out who filed it? If they didn't erase the logs, she said, eyes narrowing like a veteran preparing for war, we will. We spent 2 full days combing through the hot paperwork. Maggie's attention to detail was nothing short of remarkable. She marked every key clause with yellow sticky notes and even drew several timeline charts to track events. On the third morning, we received a reply from Barrett Law. They confirmed that Raymond had, in fact, established the trust 3 years ago. The named beneficiary was me, and the account was placed under full custodial management with the bank, scheduled for installment payouts. But then came the twist. 3 months before Raymond's death, Barrett's office received a medical certification attached to a psychiatric evaluation. It was signed by a doctor from the Lakeside Medical Center, stating, the patient exhibits progressive cognitive decline and diminished decision-making capacity. It is advised that all legal authorizations be suspended. Maggie's eyes narrowed as she scanned the page. Lakeside Medical Center? Ever heard of it? I nodded slowly. That's where Raymond had his regular checkups. His son arranged all his appointments there. She tapped her fingers against the table, her tone darkening. Something's off. 3 months before he died, Raymond was still going grocery shopping with you, watching TV, even fixing the sink in your kitchen. That's not someone slipping into cognitive decline. My throat tightened. This wasn't a misdiagnosis, I said quietly. This was a setup. Maggie fell silent for a moment, then said, our next move is to petition the court to release the original mental competency records. But we also need one more thing, someone who can testify that Raymond was fully lucid when he signed that trust. I tried to sift through the blur of memories from those years, and suddenly one came into focus. He once mentioned an old friend from the engineering association, George. He'd mentioned George went with him to sign the trust paperwork. Maggie jotted it down immediately. Can we contact him? I hesitated. He moved to the old part of town a few years back. I saw him once. He wasn't doing too well. Said his health kept him indoors most days. Maggie stood up and slipped on her trench coat. Then we're going to find him now, while the memory's fresh. So there we were, 2 old women boarding the subway, rocking along the rails toward the crumbling edges of the city. As we sat side by side, I caught my reflection in the window. Silver hair, a face etched with years. But somewhere beneath the lines, I felt something flicker to life. Maybe we can't run as far or as fast as we used to, but we can still stand where we need to stand. We can still choose not to back down, especially when you realize this fight isn't about the money. It's about guarding the last quiet gift a man left behind, his final act of love. George lived on the ground floor of a 3-story walk-up in the old part of town. The paint was peeling off his door, and the rusted doorbell didn't work. I knocked twice before a raspy voice came from inside. Who is it? It's Maggie, I said gently, trying to keep my voice warm. Raymond's friend. The door creaked open just an inch. A pair of clouded but sharp eyes studied me from the gap. It was him. He'd grown thin, almost gaunt, cheeks sunken, breath labored, but the moment he recognized me, something in his expression softened. George, I said, do you remember the trust Raymond talked about? He paused for a few seconds, then nodded. Maggie stepped forward. Can you confirm that Raymond was mentally sound when he established the trust? George stared at me for a long moment, then finally said slowly but clearly, I went with him that day to Barrett's office. He was perfectly clear the whole time. He even grabbed my hand and said, I need to make sure Maggie's taken care of. I don't want my son throwing her out someday. I covered my mouth and tears spilled down my cheeks. George shook his head. My health's not great. I never heard anything about the trust getting paid out. Figured maybe he changed his mind. It wasn't him, I said, voice shaken. It was the one you're thinking of. He tampered with it. Maggie quickly pulled out her phone and tapped the record button. Mr. George, would you be willing to give an official statement? He leaned against the door frame, catching his breath. I would. Raymond was my brother in all but blood. I promised him that if he went first, I'd make sure the truth came out. On the ride back, I stood on the subway platform for a long time, watching the lights in the tunnel. Maggie was already in touch with the court, applying for emergency witness testimony, and my mind kept circling one sentence. I need to make sure Maggie's taken care of. 2 days later, Maggie texted me. We've got a problem. We met at the Legal Aid Center. She handed me a few printed documents. Look at this. The first page was a copy of a medical filing filed by Richard. He submitted this, Maggie said, her tone like cold steel, claiming that Raymond showed increasing cognitive impairment 3 months before his death. It includes signatures from both a psychologist and a primary care doctor. She flipped to the next page. And worse, he used that claim to file a motion with the court to freeze all trust-related assets and to have the house deemed part of the family estate. My fingers went numb as I gripped the page. How did he pull this off? He exploited a legal gray area, Maggie explained. If a family member presents medical evidence raising concerns about someone's mental state, the court can temporarily freeze any third-party financial arrangements until it's resolved. I tilted my head back, staring at the ceiling. It felt like the whole world's indifference was hidden just beneath that thin coat of white paint. Maggie turned another page. This is even more outrageous. Just 1 day after submitting that request, Richard filed a property transfer application to have Raymond's house deeded to himself. He planned this from the start, I whispered. This wasn't grief, this was premeditated. She nodded. And the fact that he never brought up the trust means he always knew it existed. He just needed time to erase it. Isn't this criminal? That's for a judge to decide. If we can prove document tampering, misrepresentation to the court, and intentional asset obstruction, it could be both a civil and criminal case. She paused. But we still need one key piece to blow the door wide open. I looked at her. What piece? The surveillance footage, the original video from the trust signing. She exhaled slowly. Barrett's office said the video from that day was pulled for review and never returned to their archive. My heart dropped. Pulled by who? Richard. He came in himself, claimed he was acting on behalf of his father, and needed to review the estate arrangements. Is there any way we can get it back? If it wasn't destroyed, yes. She looked me square in the eyes. We need to file a trust litigation suit, freeze all of Richard's pending claims, then petition the court to subpoena the footage and verify the credentials of the doctors who signed those evaluations. You mean sue him? Maggie nodded, her voice steady and unflinching. Yes, it's our move now. That night, I came home alone and sat under the dim kitchen light, staring at Raymond's old mug, deep blue, with a fine crack near the rim. He'd never let me throw it out. And now I finally understood why. He'd known that his son would never respect his choices, known that he had to leave something behind, something solid, if I was going to have any chance of standing my ground after he was gone. And I'd come to understand something else, too. Some people take 3 years to show you their heart. Others only need 3 seconds to show you who they really are. Maggie was right. We had to fight this. But there was a problem. We had the bank statements, the trust documents, even the altered signature page. But what we didn't have, the one piece of evidence that could tip everything, was an in-person witness who could confirm Raymond had been fully aware when he signed it. Maggie sat at my tiny dining table, flipping through the trust papers for the 100th time. Look here, she said, pointing to a redacted section. It originally said witness present, but the name was scratched out. My brows knit. So, what does that mean? It means your partner had someone with him when he signed this, she said. We just don't know who. I stared at the empty space on the page, and suddenly, like someone had tugged on a string inside my memory, it hit me. That time, I remember we used to visit someone often. Maggie looked up. Who? George, an old friend from Raymond's engineering days. Around the time the trust was signed, we saw him almost every week. I paused, then said, one day he even joked, your man dragged me along just in case he couldn't read the fine print and needed someone to share the blame. I didn't get it then, but now I think he was talking about the day they signed the documents. Maggie grabbed her notepad. You remember where he lives? Old District, near that half-demolished hardware store. She snapped the folder shut. Let's go find him. We headed out around 3 in the afternoon. The building was a weather-worn red brick walk-up, with floral towels hanging from the balconies. Maggie knocked on the door while I stood behind her, clutching a photo of Raymond, my heart thudding against my ribs. The door opened. George looked even frailer than I remembered, his skin sallow, his frame shrunken, leaning heavily on a dark wooden cane. His eyes paused when they found mine. "It's you," he said, voice gravelly. I gave him a small, hopeful smile. "George, do you remember me? I'm Maggie." He didn't return the smile. His gaze shifted inward, as if retreating. "Why are you here?" "I wanted to talk about the day Raymond signed the trust," I said gently. His face tightened. He shook his head. "I don't remember anything about that." Maggie stepped forward, firm but polite. "Mr. George, we're only asking if you'd be willing to confirm that you were present the day Raymond signed the documents." "He created that trust too," I said. "I don't remember." George's voice suddenly sharpened. He slammed his cane on the floor for emphasis. "It's been 3 years. I'm just an old man. What do I remember?" I stood frozen, mouth open, words gone. Maggie tugged my sleeve lightly. We knew better than to push. We thanked him and left. The door shut behind us and something inside me went cold. But Maggie's brow was furrowed, not with disappointment, but calculation. "He's lying," she said. "You mean he remembers?" "He remembers everything." Her voice was calm but edged with steel. "He just doesn't want to get involved, and the way he shut us down, it was too fast, like he'd rehearsed it." I felt a chill ripple through me, and then, like a crack splitting open in the back of my mind, the thought came rushing in. Richard. Maybe he'd gotten to George first. I barely slept that night. Just before dawn, I pulled out an old cardboard box Raymond had left behind. Inside were a few faded photos and letters. Right on top was a picture of him and George, taken in front of the factory. Raymond had his arms slung over George's shoulder, grinning like a teenager. Beneath it was a yellowed envelope signed, "Raymond. George, if I go before you, I'm asking you please look out for Maggie. She's got a tough mouth, but her heart's the softest I know. She never lets anyone do anything for her. I just want to help her one last time." The tears came before I even reached the end. The next morning, I went to George's apartment myself, the photo and letter clutched tightly in hand. He opened the door in a wrinkled shirt, his expression tightening as soon as he saw me. "You again?" I didn't say much. I simply placed the photo and the letter on the wicker chair beside his door. "I won't come a third time," I said, "but these are his words. Do with them what you will." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back to see if he picked them up. That night, George sat alone in his worn-out recliner, the photograph in one hand, the letter in the other. The ticking clock on the wall echoed across the small room, but his gaze stayed fixed on the paper. "She never lets anyone do anything for her. I just want to help her one last time." He read it again and again. After a long while, he muttered to himself, "You stubborn old mule, can't even let me rest after you're gone." At 8 sharp the next morning, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, George stood there, leaning on his cane, his old baseball cap sitting crooked on his head. "Maggie," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "I'll testify." My throat tightened. I couldn't get a single word out. He looked me over and grumbled, "My memory's not what it used to be. You better write me a script. I don't read much, but I'll say exactly what your man said that day, word for word." Maggie moved fast. She filed an emergency application with the court for witness testimony. We set up a camera and mic in George's living room. He wore a clean shirt, had even shaved his scruffy beard. Sitting tall in his wicker chair, he began to speak, slowly but steadily. He was sharp, sharper than me. Before he signed, he read every page twice. Then he looked at me and said, "If she finds out I left her money, she'll probably be mad, but I don't want her growing old alone." When the recording stopped, George leaned back, eyes closed, exhaling like he just laid something heavy to rest. "I did what I was supposed to do," he said. On the way home, the sun was fierce overhead, but inside, for the first time in a long while, I felt clear, not because the battle was almost won, but because someone finally stood up to speak the truth. I never imagined I'd end up in a courtroom, let alone to fight for a man who was no longer in this world against his own son. But that day had come. That morning, I wore my plainest gray trench coat and held tightly to the documents Maggie had printed. We arrived at the courthouse early and sat on one of the long benches in the waiting area. Maggie was flipping through her notes, focused and steady. I, on the other hand, stared blankly at the wooden paneling in front of us. The American flag above the judge's bench swayed gently under the hum of the air conditioning, and for a moment, I was back in that sunlit living room 3 years ago, Raymond sitting on the couch, saying, "You don't have to listen to those finance shows. I'll handle the money." He was never one for big declarations, but that day he looked so serious. The clerk called our case. We stood and entered the courtroom, a space so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Richard was already seated at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a stiff dark suit, posture immaculate. But his eyes wandered. When he looked at me, it was with the detached glance of someone sizing up a nuisance. The judge was a woman in her 50s, her tone neutral, edged with a hint of impatience. "We're here to determine the validity of the plaintiff's request to nullify the living trust established by the late Raymond Walker," she began. "We will now hear evidence and testimony from both parties." Maggie rose to speak first, her voice calm and firm. "We are submitting documentation confirming that the trust in question was created 3 years ago by Mr. Raymond Walker while fully mentally competent. The named beneficiary is the defendant, Miss Maggie Lowe." She handed over the trust copy, bank transfer records, and a medical statement from a primary care physician noting cognitive functions within normal range. As the judge flipped through the pages, I noticed Richard shift in his seat like the papers were too hot to touch. Then it was his lawyer's turn, a seasoned man in his 50s, sharp-tongued and deliberate. "We present psychiatric evaluations from within 3 months before and after the trust signing. These records, signed by a licensed psychiatrist, state the patient demonstrated memory lapses and impaired judgment. Legal decision-making should be restricted." He turned and gestured toward me. "Additionally, we note that this trust was created without informing Mr. Walker's family, nor was it filed through family court channels. There are indications of an attempt to bypass rightful inheritance proceedings." Maggie smiled faintly. "He was an adult, free to make his own decisions. No law requires him to notify his relatives." The judge nodded. "We need more direct evidence." At that, Maggie signaled to the court clerk to activate the screen. The video testimony from George began to play. There he was, seated in his worn wicker chair, dressed in a clean if faded shirt. His voice was steady, eyes sharp. I went with him to the law office. He was clearer than I was, used his reading glasses, went through every page, and before he signed, he said, "I'm doing this now because one day my son might throw her out over money. I want her protected." The courtroom went still. When the video ended, Maggie stood again. Now, this testimony was recorded under court supervision with legal counsel and transcription present. The witness was not coached or influenced. Richard's lawyer tried to counter. "We acknowledge Mr. George had a close friendship with the deceased, but how credible is his memory?" Maggie's tone cooled. "You mean after you visited him and suggested his elder care might be taken care of if he stayed quiet?" Richard shot up from his seat. "That was me being considerate. He's old. I was trying to help. What's wrong with that?" The judge banged the gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Walker." Maggie pulled out one final document, a scanned copy of a letter handwritten by Raymond, dated 1 week before the trust was signed. "Dear Brother George, you've helped Maggie with water leaks and busted light bulbs more times than I can count. I need to do something to shield her from the storms ahead. She's stubborn. Don't tell her I set up the trust." With the letter entered into evidence, the tide had shifted. Maggie's closing blow was a written statement from Raymond's primary care doctor. At no time during the trust period was Mr. Walker diagnosed or treated for cognitive impairment at our facility. No record supports the claim of mental incompetence. The judge looked up, her expression unreadable. "Counsel, do you have anything else?" Richard's lawyer leafed through his folder, then muttered, "No, Your Honor." The judge cleared her throat and read the decision slowly. "Based on the testimony, documentation, and evidence provided, this court finds that Mr. Raymond Walker was of sound mind at the time of the trust's creation. The trust is valid. The plaintiff's request for nullification is denied. Furthermore, due to the submission of potentially falsified medical records, this court reserves the right to open an investigation into the individuals responsible. I didn't hear the rest. It was like someone had lifted a sack of stones from my chest. I felt Maggie lean toward me and whisper, "We won." I didn't answer, I just nodded. Richard's face had turned to stone. He didn't look at me again, just grabbed his papers and walked out, not saying a word. When Maggie and I walked out of the courthouse, daylight still lingered. The breeze against my face was soft, the kind that only comes with spring. I sat down on a bench near the corner, holding the photocopy of Raymond's letter to George in my hands. The paper was a little wrinkled, but the handwriting was still crisp. "She's stubborn. Don't tell her I set up the trust." I stared at that line and let out a quiet laugh. "You old fool," I whispered, "stubborn as ever." I looked up at the sky and said softly, "Don't worry." I held the line. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept straight through until morning. No jolts awake at 3 a.m., no nightmares with Richard's cold eyes staring me down. I dreamed I was standing in the narrow alley of the old farmer's market. Raymond was ahead of me, calling out, "Maggie, this stall's got the best pork ribs, fresh too." He was smiling, same as always, that worn canvas tote swinging from his arm. When I woke, my cheeks were damp, but my chest felt light. But the verdict wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. I still had another fight ahead, this time with my own body. The doctor had said from the start, the sooner the surgery, the better. But with my finances stretched thin and Richard trying to wipe me out, I'd kept putting it off. Now things were different. I went in for a full set of tests. The surgery was scheduled for a Friday morning. The night before my admission, I sat on the hospital bed and pulled out my little ledger, the one I always used to jot down expenses. In the corner of the last page, I wrote, "I used the money you left me to put myself back together. Now I want to fix something for someone else." The surgery went well. When I woke up, sunlight was pouring through the window. A nurse wheeled me out onto the terrace to get some air, and I watched the rooftops of the city with their humming air conditioners spinning slowly in the heat. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I didn't quite have a word for. Not joy, not peace, but a deep, steady sense of being alive. During my first week home, I spent the days in the living room, listening to the breeze rustle through the old locust tree outside the window. I watched neighborhood women pushing their grocery carts past the corner like they always had, life moving in quiet rhythm. Maggie came by with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers. "You said you wanted to do something," she said, dropping the pile on the table. "So let's do it." I looked. On top was an application form. Across the top it read, "Community Public Service Micro Grant Registration." "You're serious?" I asked. "You've got part of the trust left. Doesn't take much. Start small, $20,000. The rest is up to you." I spent the night thinking. By morning, I knew what I wanted. In my own handwriting, I filled out the form. Project name, Golden Second Chance. Target group, elderly living alone, widowed retirees, legal aid recipients, mental health support seekers. Maggie helped me file the paperwork, register the project, and connect with the local legal aid office. She even brought in a few retired attorneys who volunteered their time and reached out to the neighborhood health clinic to build a partnership. It had begun. I cleared out the spare bedroom in my old apartment and turned it into a little meeting space. Nothing fancy, but it was enough. The first visitor was Mrs. Liu from downstairs. She sat carefully on the old sofa, covered in a plain white cotton cloth, and said in a hushed, uncertain voice, "After my husband passed, his son started pressuring me to put the house in his name. I didn't go to school. I don't really understand." I handed her a cup of hot tea. "Take your time," I said. "Here, we don't rush and we don't scare anyone." When I walked her to the door later, she clutched my hand and whispered, "Thank you." I was really afraid no one would listen. As I closed the door, I suddenly felt like a kind of repairwoman, not the kind who fixes sinks or wires, the kind who tries to stitch back the pieces of someone's unraveling life in old age. Months passed, and Golden Second Chance became a quiet little name in our community. Some folks came with inheritance questions, unsure how to deal with their kids. Some just came to sit in silence, tired of being alone and needing the sound of another human voice. People started calling me the real angel for us seniors, and every time I heard it, a warm embarrassment would rise in my chest. I'm no angel, I'd think. I just finally stopped living under shame and silence. One day, while tidying the meeting room, I came across Raymond's letter to George again. I read the final line, my fingers resting on the paper. She never lets anyone do anything for her. I just want to help her one last time. I read it aloud, voice barely above a whisper. Now it's my turn, I said, to help someone else. The day we won the lawsuit, Richard didn't say a single word, just walked out of the courtroom and disappeared. I thought that would be the last chapter between us. But fate isn't a thread you can just snip clean. It has a way of bleeding ink onto pages you thought were already turned. 3 months later, Maggie came by. She sat down and opened with, "Did you hear Richard got fired?" I nearly dropped my teacup. What? After the hearing, someone anonymously tipped off his company about the forged medical documents. She pulled a newspaper clipping from her bag. The headline was short, but it hit hard. Real estate project manager under investigation for trust fraud. Company launches internal review. I stared at the bold black letters, silent for a long moment. What happened? I finally asked. They suspended him for 30 days, then let him go. No severance. I let out a breath. Serves him right. Maggie didn't respond at first. Then she said, almost like a warning, he underestimated how fast the world moves on, especially when a middle-aged man's out of work. Later, I heard the rest in bits and pieces, gossip traded at the grocery store entrance. They say his wife moved out. Moved months ago. He secretly mortgaged her property to pay off credit cards, thinking he'd win in court, lost the case and the cash. She's back at her parents' with the kid. That boy doesn't even speak to him anymore. That man thought he was so clever he ended up with no one left to speak for him. I listened. I didn't add a word, but inside I felt something I hadn't expected. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't pity either. It was something quieter, heavier. So karma is real after all, I thought. Just walk slower than we do. One early autumn evening, I went downstairs to take out the trash. The sky was overcast, and the wind had picked up. Just as I turned to head back inside, I caught sight of a figure standing beneath the old camphor tree at the corner of the street, not too close, not too far, like someone waiting or just passing through. I pretended not to see him. The next morning, on my way out to buy milk, he was there again, closer this time, dressed in a faded hoodie, hair a tangled mess, hands buried in his pockets, face rigid and pale. On the third day, he was sitting on my doorstep. When I pulled back the curtain, I saw him slumped on the steps, clutching a canvas bag like it held everything he had left. He looked like someone who hadn't slept indoors for days. I didn't open the door right away. It took me 10 minutes to lace my shoes to decide. When I finally opened it, a gust of wind swept in, carrying a scatter of dry leaves. We locked eyes, no words. Then he looked down and cleared his throat, his voice raspy. "I'm not here to cause trouble, I just came to ask one thing." I waited. He swallowed hard, like the words hurt going down. "I've got nowhere left to go." I didn't invite him in. I stood in the doorway and asked calmly, "What about your friends, your wife, your kid?" He kept his head down. "No one wants to see me." "What are you here for then?" "What do you want from me?" There was a pause, then came the answer, heavy and bitter. "Just a place to stay for a while." My hand was still resting on the door handle. I didn't move. I didn't need to say anything right away because I knew he needed this more than I needed to respond. That's when it hit me. He hadn't come to me first. He'd knocked on every door he could think of, heard every no, felt every shoulder turn cold. And after all that, he came here not out of dignity, but to finally lay down the scraps of pride he'd clung to. I nodded. "There's a spare room downstairs, the old guest room. You can stay for 3 months." His head jerked up, eyes bloodshot. For a moment, it looked like he couldn't even form the words, "Thank you." I continued, voice steady. "During those 3 months, I'll connect you with a caseworker and some local resources. You can take the help or leave it. After that, you're on your own, and starting today, I won't let you hurt anyone again." He nodded like a man who'd finally been pulled out of deep water. Before he came inside, I handed him a clean towel to wipe his face. Then I gave him a fresh pair of socks. He sat silently at the kitchen table and ate a bowl of rice porridge. I didn't ask how he was. I didn't smother him with sympathy. As he stood to leave the kitchen, I simply said, "Before your father passed, he kept hoping you'd figure it out one day. That being a decent man has nothing to do with what you win or lose, and everything to do with walking the right path." He didn't turn around, didn't say a word, but I knew he heard me. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. No, I hadn't forgiven him, but I wasn't willing to live the rest of my life dragging hatred behind me either. I chose to help him once, not because he had changed, but because I finally had the strength not to be broken by him. You ask if it was mercy. It was clarity. There's a kind of dignity in this world that doesn't come from winning, it comes from standing your ground. I stood mine, and him, he's only just beginning to learn. After he moved into the guest room downstairs, we barely spoke. I didn't go out of my way to care for him, and he never initiated a single conversation. He ate quietly, kept the place clean, and sometimes went down to the community center to register for volunteer shifts. No one there knew who he used to be. Some nights I'd hear him pacing in the room below, long dragging footsteps like sleep never came easily. A few times he came back holding job application forms. He tossed them onto the table with a sigh, his shoulders folding in on themselves. "What did you do before?" I asked one day, just in passing. He looked down and muttered, "Project manager." I nodded. "Then it's not too late to learn how to write your own cover letter." He let out a dry laugh. "At my age? Who's going to hire me now?" I didn't offer comfort. I just said, "All the more reason you should understand no one's coming to save you." We didn't speak much after that meal. 2 weeks later, after dinner, I was in the kitchen doing dishes when he lingered at the doorway. He watched me for a while before finally speaking. "I used to hate you." I didn't stop scrubbing, just acknowledged him with a small sound. "I thought you only got close to my dad for what he had," he said. The water was loud in the sink, drowning my breath. He went on, voice thinner now. "But now I get it. What he left you, it wasn't money, it was love. What he wanted to protect was you, and back then, I tried to take that from him even at the end." The room went quiet, save for the drip of the faucet. I set the plate down and turned around. "And now you see it?" He nodded, gave a short, bitter laugh. "I've been here watching your second chance project. The people who come in, most of them are wrecked, and yet every one of them still holds on to some kind of hope." He took a breath. "And me? I didn't even deserve the word hope." I didn't interrupt. He looked up again. "Thank you, truly. But I can't stay here anymore." I blinked. "You found somewhere else to go?" He shook his head. "Not yet, but I can't keep leaning on you like this. You've already done more than anyone else ever has. If I stay, I'd just be turning your kindness into a crutch." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Maggie, maybe the best thing my dad ever did was find you." My throat tightened, but I simply nodded. "You're not the first to say that, but you're the one who needed to say it the most." The next morning he left. No goodbye, no knock on my door, just a note left on the kitchen table. "I'm going to try to clean up my own mess. No promises, but I'll try. You gave me a shot. I won't forget it." Richard, I didn't cry when I read it. I just felt something shift, like the house. This place where so much dignity had once been trampled was finally breathing again, cleared of the weight it had been holding. I wasn't his stepmother, I wasn't his enemy, and I wasn't going to be his rescue plan. I was Raymond's partner, a woman who chose to help his son once and then let him go. I didn't chase after Richard. I simply cleaned the guest room, replaced the sheets, and left my favorite old book by the pillow. The door stayed open. The next person looking for a second chance might already be on their way. How many times can a person really start over? I've asked myself that. After Raymond passed, after I was thrown out of the house, after I was told alone in a cold doctor's office that I had lung cancer. I used to think starting over was a privilege reserved for the young. But now I know starting over isn't an event. It's a decision you make again and again, every time life knocks you down, cuts you deep, or pushes you to the edge, and you still choose to wipe your hands, lift your head, and take one more step forward. Golden Second Chance slowly became a kind of quiet legend in our little town. The people who walked through that door weren't just widows or broken-hearted women. They were lonely old men, proud middle-aged folks who didn't know how to ask for help, people who thought they were beyond repair. I held 2 sessions a week, and once a week, I recorded a podcast. No lectures, no headlines, just stories from my life. Your children aren't your retirement plan. They're the result of choices you made when you were young. Whose name goes on the deed shouldn't be based on love. It should be based on sense. Getting old isn't the problem. The problem is letting yourself be treated like a burden. At first, I didn't think anyone was listening, but then strangers started leaving messages. My mom says you sound like the version of herself she never had the words to be. My dad pretends he doesn't like podcasts, but he listens to every single episode, start to finish. I named it Better at 70. Someone once asked me, "Do you really think life can get better at 70?" I told them, better doesn't mean richer or louder or younger. It means you're not scared of being alone anymore, not scared of being misunderstood, not scared to say no. It means you start living like you, not like someone's wife or mother or label. One day, I held a small community talk at the local library. Most of the audience had gray hair and soft hands. Two young women sat in the back row, wiping their eyes when they thought no one could see. I stood there holding a weathered card in my palm, Raymond's last letter, and I told them, "A lot of you think your life's already been written, that it's too late. But I was 66 when I got kicked out of my home, 66 when I was diagnosed with cancer, 68 when I stood in a courtroom, 69 when I went through surgery, and at 70 I became a woman whose stories reached over 100,000 people, not because I'm special, but because I finally believed I deserved a chapter that was just for me." That night, walking home under the bluest sky I'd seen in months, I pulled out my phone. I opened my recording app, and into the mic I said, "Welcome to Better at 70. I'm Maggie. Today I want to talk about the word old age. It's a word too many people get wrong. It's not the end. It's the first time you get to choose whether to keep shrinking yourself to please others, whether to keep giving until you disappear, or whether to finally say, no more. I want something different. I deserve to try. Even if no one claps, even if no one believes in you but you." I paused, then smiled just a little. Even if, like me, you're 70 years old and just now learning how to say, "This is my life. No, I can't rewrite the first half of my story, but at last I've written my own ending, plain, free, and full of light. And this time belongs only to me."